Rome defeated every enemy it ever faced, except the one that never came. After the disaster in the Teutoburg Forest, the empire expected the German tribes to scatter back into feuds and rivalries. Rome believed Arminius had achieved his greatest victory, and would go no further. The legions rebuilt their borders, convinced that Germania lacked the unity or discipline to ever challenge them again. But deep in the northern forests, a different plan was forming. Not a war of empire against empire, but a war born of silence, shadows, and blood-bound promises. Arminius returned to his homeland a hero, honored for destroying 3 Roman legions. Yet his greatest struggle was not against Rome. It was against the German tribes themselves. Their independence was rigid. Their hatred for one another was ancient. Most believed Teutoburg had been enough. Why risk more? Arminius alone saw the truth. Rome would never forgive the humiliation. Germanicus, the adopted heir of the imperial family, was already gathering new legions beyond the Rhine. His goal was not merely revenge. He intended to drag Germania back under Roman iron. If Rome returned, Germania would be divided, enslaved, erased. Every village, every forest shrine, gone. Arminius understood that the only way to survive was to strike first. The tribes had to unite, not for glory, but for survival. But a paradox lay at the heart of his plan. Rome feared great empires, yet the only German force capable of destroying Rome was one that did not yet exist. So Arminius began in secret. He reached out to his blood brothers in the Cherusci, then to farther tribes, Bructeri, Chatti, Marsi, even the distant Marcomanni. He offered not leadership, but vengeance. Word spread quietly, through winter markets and forest paths. Riders traveled at night. Chiefs gathered in hidden clearings where torches flickered beneath ancient oaks. They remembered what Rome had taken. The sons stolen to serve as auxiliaries, the tribute demanded, the pride crushed under steel. Anger ran deeper than any river. Germanicus marched north with an army large enough to burn half the continent. His banners cast long shadows across the Rhine. Yet something felt wrong. Scouts vanished. Offerings appeared at the edges of roads. Wolf skulls, broken Roman blades, symbols of warning. Then the whispers grew. The Germans were not retreating. They were preparing. Germanicus expected scattered resistance, small, chaotic bands. But these movements felt coordinated, purposeful. Villages emptied before Roman arrival, not in fear, but by command. Food stores had been moved. Forest paths were blocked with carefully placed branches. This was no retreat. It was strategy. The Rhine frontier became eerily quiet. No tribes begged for mercy. No rival chiefs sought Roman favor. Instead, Germanicus found abandoned village squares marked with carved runes: wolf, spear, fire. A message: we are one. In Rome, the Senate dismissed reports. Germania, they said, was a land of drunken tribes, incapable of unity. But the Emperor Tiberius read the warnings with unease. He remembered that Teutoburg had not been a chaotic ambush. It had been engineered by a man who understood Rome from within. Arminius had studied their generals, their politics, their weaknesses. He knew that Rome's strength was also its flaw: confidence. Rome believed only an empire could defeat an empire. It never imagined a loose brotherhood, hidden in forest shadows, could threaten its existence. Arminius wanted more than victory. He wanted to march south, across the Alps, to the very gates of Rome. Not to conquer land, but to shatter the myth of Roman invincibility forever. The first step was gathering the tribes. The second was preparing the weapon Rome feared most: a united northern host, invisible until the moment of strike. The Romans patrolled the forests, but they saw only darkness. Inside, beneath the branches of sacred groves, chiefs placed their hands upon a stone altar, older than Rome itself. One by one, they swore an oath. If Rome returned, they would ride as one. Out of silence, an army would rise. Germanicus felt time slipping away. Each delay strengthened Arminius. Each mile the Romans marched drew them deeper into a land they did not understand. The memory of Teutoburg haunted the legions. Officers swore they heard chanting in the trees. Some said they saw figures watching from the ridge. Never attacking, only waiting. Rome was used to open battlefields, clear rules, visible foes. But this was a different war. A war shaped by the forest, unseen and patient. Arminius was no longer defending Germania. He was preparing to destroy Rome. The tribes had united before, briefly, desperately, but never like this. Not with a plan, not with purpose. And Rome, blinded by pride, still believed it faced scattered tribes. It had no idea what was coming. The first message Arminius sent to Rome was not a battle cry. It was silence. A silence that marked the beginning of a war Rome never believed could exist. The silence across Germania was deceptive. To the Romans, it seemed as if the tribes had retreated into their forests, cowed by the weight of Rome's legions. Yet inside that same wilderness, Arminius moved with precision, orchestrating a network of scouts, messengers, and secret alliances that even Germanicus could not detect. Arminius had learned from Rome's own playbook. He studied their supply lines, their scouting patterns, even their marching formations. Every river ford, every ridge, every grove became a potential advantage. Nothing was left to chance. Each movement was calculated to draw the Romans deeper into unfamiliar terrain, terrain the Cherusci and their allies knew intimately. Word spread quietly through the forests. Tribes who had once fought each other now exchanged spies, warriors, and supplies. Every chief understood the stakes, their lands, their families, their freedom. But Arminius went further. He reminded them of the humiliation Rome had imposed, of their ancestors slain or enslaved, of temples desecrated in conquest. Rage fused with strategy, creating a force far more formidable than any single legion. Meanwhile, Germanicus believed the north was merely a place of scattered threats. He sent patrols into forests, expecting minor skirmishes, only to find empty villages, carefully abandoned supplies, and the occasional burned hut. Enough to signal resistance, but not enough to reveal the truth. Each time, he assumed the enemy was weak, and each time, he underestimated the growing unity of the tribes. Arminius, however, did not stop at uniting the Cherusci. He reached out to tribes farther afield. The Bructeri, Chatti, Marsi, and even the distant Suebi. These groups had been enemies in the past, but Arminius framed their cooperation as a fight not for glory or territory, but for survival. He spoke in terms of Rome's threat, a silent, inevitable empire that would return to destroy them all if they remained divided. What the Romans did not know was that a small but elite contingent of warriors had been trained in tactics Rome had used against them in the past. Arminius took lessons from Roman manuals, observing their strategies during Teutoburg, and even their defensive setups along the Rhine. The Germanic warriors learned to fight like the Romans, anticipating formations, exploiting weaknesses, and blending guerrilla techniques with conventional military understanding. And then came the first test. A Roman supply convoy, marching along the northern forests, disappeared overnight. Scouts found no bodies, no battle remains, only the echo of movement through the trees, and a few traces of deliberately left signs. Broken branches in precise patterns, arrow shafts pointing toward the east. Germanicus assumed ambushes were minor and dispersed. In truth, they were rehearsal exercises for something far larger. In Rome, whispers of unrest reached the Senate. Some senators demanded a decisive campaign into Germania to teach them the empire's lesson. Others warned of a hidden threat, a potential uprising that could spiral beyond the Rhine. Tiberius, however, hesitated, believing Germania too remote to matter beyond the immediate border. This hesitation became a critical advantage. Every day Rome delayed, Arminius consolidated his network, strengthened alliances, and drilled his warriors. Then came the night that changed everything. Scouts reported unusual fires deep in the forest. Not large, but enough to signal coordination. Horns, low chants, and rhythmic movements echoed through the canopy. Germanicus dismissed it as superstition or minor tribal rituals, but the officers under him were unsettled. There was a strange precision, an almost deliberate warning in the sounds, as if the forest itself were alive and conspiring against the legions. Arminius had discovered Rome's most dangerous vulnerability: overconfidence. By appearing scattered, quiet, and small, he forced the empire to underestimate the true strength of his coalition. The paradox deepened. A force invisible on paper, almost impossible to measure, could threaten the mightiest army in the world. Every village, every patrol, every hidden camp added to the illusion that Germania remained disorganized. But the Cherusci were ready. Arminius had selected a small council of the fiercest warriors, each sworn to secrecy. They studied Roman battle codes, practiced ambush drills, and memorized river paths that could trap entire legions. The forests became living weapons, traps, signals, and hideouts all in one. Germanicus began to sense something was wrong, yet he could not see it. The forest was too vast, too familiar to the tribes, too alien to Roman eyes. Every step deeper brought more uncertainty, each shadow potentially hiding hundreds of warriors. His reports grew urgent, yet Rome continued to underestimate the threat. Then came the moment when Arminius finally revealed a glimpse of what he intended. A coordinated attack designed not merely to repel Rome, but to invade the very perception of invincibility the empire held. If his plan succeeded, the Romans would not simply lose a battle. They would lose confidence in their ability to control the world, and Germania would rise as a ghostly power, a shadow empire that Rome had never even imagined existed. And so the stage was set. The tribes were united. The legions marched blindly. The forest whispered secrets of vengeance, strategy, and war that Rome had never learned. The question remained: when the moment came, would Arminius strike? Or would the empire discover the truth before it was too late? Because in this war, the first mistake would be fatal. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of shadowed trees and hidden valleys. Germanicus marched deeper into Germania, unaware that every step played directly into Arminius's hands. Each ridge, river crossing, and abandoned settlement was a trap, not of death, but of perception. The Romans began to doubt what they could see. Scouts returned shaken, speaking of distant chants, fleeting shadows, and arrows that appeared out of nowhere. Germanicus dismissed some reports as fear or superstition, yet the unease spread like wildfire through the ranks. Arminius had transformed the forests into a weapon of psychology. His warriors moved like ghosts, striking silently, then vanishing. Supplies went missing in ways that seemed impossible. Paths were subtly altered to confuse Roman scouts. Small skirmishes, staged in carefully chosen locations, left Romans bloodied but puzzled. It was never enough to cause a full-scale battle, yet it was enough to plant fear. Rome's legions, accustomed to clear victories, began to feel the unfamiliar weight of uncertainty. In the dead of night, Arminius gathered his council. Tribal leaders who had once fought each other now sat around fires, faces lit by flickering flames, eyes sharp with determination. He spoke not as a hero of one tribe, but as the architect of a united Germania. His words were precise, each sentence a strategy in itself. Rome believes the forest is their ally. They are wrong. Every tree, every river, every shadow serves us. They march blindly into what they cannot see. The tribes had begun training together, learning not just war, but coordination. Signals were practiced, whistles, drumbeats, and subtle markings on trees that only the initiated could read. Warriors memorized the Roman formations and predicted their movements, blending knowledge with instinct. They were learning to fight like Rome, but with the advantage of terrain and secrecy. Meanwhile, Germanicus became increasingly frustrated. Every ambush seemed to vanish before he could strike. His officers argued for aggression, but he hesitated. The forest, once familiar in campaigns against scattered tribes, now seemed alive, watching, waiting. Every false trail, every missing supply line, tightened the psychological grip Arminius had designed. Then came the first true test. A Roman detachment, tasked with securing a river crossing, stumbled into a trap. Warriors emerged silently from the trees, flanking and encircling them. But instead of a full massacre, they left clues. Roman helmets placed neatly on branches, spears stuck in patterns only scouts could interpret. When Germanicus arrived, he found the soldiers alive, but shaken, and the forest empty of attackers. It was a warning, and a puzzle. Back in Rome, reports of missing soldiers and odd forest phenomena began to stir anxiety in the Senate. Whispers circulated. Germania was no longer just a land of drunken tribes. Could the Germans actually organize a threat? Could they strike beyond their borders? Most dismissed these fears, citing Arminius's death years prior and the failure of previous uprisings. Yet the seeds of doubt had been planted. Arminius, however, knew that perception was everything. Rome's confidence was the empire's greatest weapon, and his greatest target. By manipulating what they saw, or more importantly, what they failed to see, he created the illusion of power far greater than his forces actually possessed. Every abandoned village, every staged ambush, every shadow in the night whispered a single message. We are more than you imagine. We are everywhere. The tribes themselves began to feel a new confidence. Chiefs who once argued over petty feuds now deferred to Arminius's strategic vision. Each victory, even minor, reinforced the bond. Scouts returned with reports of Roman movement patterns, legion fatigue, and supply shortages. Arminius studied these meticulously, plotting the moment when Germania could strike decisively. And yet, even with all this preparation, danger lurked. The Romans were still immense in number, their discipline legendary. One misstep, one overreach, and the tribes could be destroyed. Arminius's plan balanced on a knife's edge. The line between audacious victory and catastrophic failure was razor-thin. He devised the ultimate test, a coordinated feint across multiple fronts. Small groups would harass the Roman camps from different directions, leaving trails that suggested a much larger army than existed. Smoke columns, hidden drums, false flags, all designed to sow fear, uncertainty, and indecision. If Germanicus reacted prematurely, His legions could be funneled into traps, cut off from their supplies, and rendered vulnerable. The stage was set. The forest whispered, the tribes waited, and the Romans marched blindly, unaware that history itself could be rewritten in the coming days. Every shadow seemed to pulse with intent, every tree a sentinel for the coming storm. And at the heart of it all, Arminius knew one undeniable truth. Rome had survived countless wars because it never underestimated its enemies. This time, he intended to change that, to prove that even an empire, vast and unstoppable, could face annihilation from a force that existed only in the minds of its generals. The first clash of what could have been the northern campaign was about to begin. The first true engagement came not with the thunder of legions, but with whispers in the trees. Roman scouts reported skirmishes, brief, precise, and puzzling. Warriors appeared and vanished like ghosts, leaving confusion in their wake. Germanicus, increasingly anxious, realized that the enemy was no longer scattered tribes, but a coordinated force that seemed to anticipate every move. Arminius had orchestrated his forces into a shadow army, each tribe knowing its role, yet moving in absolute secrecy. They struck with discipline that mirrored the Romans' own legions, yet remained hidden in forests, hills, and river valleys. Each encounter was a message. We are everywhere and nowhere. The psychological toll on the Roman commanders was immense. Every step they took, every camp they set, was accompanied by the uncertainty of the unseen. The larger plan was audacious. Arminius intended to march his coalition south, through the Rhine, across the Alps, and into Italy itself. The goal was not conquest, but annihilation of Rome's sense of invincibility. He understood that victory in the field mattered less than breaking the myth that Rome could not be challenged. Every river crossed, every village liberated, every Roman supply line disrupted, would fuel fear and doubt across the empire. Germanicus, frustrated and unnerved, attempted to consolidate his legions. He sent messages back to Rome, warning that Germania was no longer a land of petty resistance. Rome, confident in its strength and bound by bureaucracy, dismissed much of it. The emperor trusted his legions, as he always had. Yet even as orders were issued, the forest worked against them. Paths led them in circles, ambushes appeared in impossible locations, and scouts returned with stories that seemed to belong to legend rather than reality. Then came the moment that could have rewritten history. Arminius's coalition, numbering tens of thousands from the united Germanic tribes, prepared to engage the Romans at a narrow valley near the Rhine. Here, the full strength of his strategy would be revealed. A trap so carefully designed that an entire legion could be encircled and destroyed before reinforcements could arrive. Every river crossing was mapped, every ridge surveyed, every signal accounted for. Yet the plan, as perfect as it seemed, was never executed to its full potential. Internal disputes among the tribes delayed the final march south. Some chieftains feared overreach, others doubted their ability to strike so deep into Roman territory. Arminius, aware of the delicate balance, pressed, but even his charisma could not erase centuries of tribal suspicion overnight. The army was ready, the strategy sound, yet hesitation proved fatal. Germanicus, sensing opportunity, pulled back slightly to regroup. The Romans remained unaware that the trap had almost been set, that the forest held an army capable of striking at the heart of the empire. Arminius's forces, hidden from view, watched silently, understanding that the moment for decisive action had passed. For now, the paradox remained. A united, cunning, and motivated force capable of toppling the greatest empire of the ancient world, existed, yet never struck. Rome survived, not because the army was stronger, but because hesitation, circumstance, and cautious tribal politics denied the Cherusci the final blow. Still, the threat left a lasting mark. Even in their retreat, the tribes had proven that Rome was not invincible, that an empire could be challenged in ways it never anticipated. Every Roman commander who survived the campaign carried with them the memory of an invisible enemy, one that had almost rewritten the rules of power. Arminius, though celebrated among the tribes, understood the bitter truth. Opportunity is fleeting, and empires survive not just through strength, but through luck, timing, and misjudgment. Germania remained free, but the world would never know how close Rome came to collapsing from a force that existed only in shadows. The empire moved on, consolidating its borders, unaware that in the northern forests, the Cherusci and their allies had almost marched on Rome itself. And in that almost, the story of a war that never happened. History found its greatest what-if. For those who study the empire, the lesson remains. The mightiest armies can be undone, not by overwhelming force, but by a coalition born of secrecy, strategy, and the audacity to strike when no one expects it. Rome survived, but the shadow of Arminius's army haunted it forever. A silent warning that the world is shaped not just by those who fight, but by those who dare to imagine the impossible.